You've been busy for quite some time looking at buying your first commercial property or business, and you found one that you really like, and the time has come for you to put in an offer. But hang on a minute, how do you actually do that? Well, I'm glad you asked, and trust me, you're not the first person to have asked me. I'm Peter Bender from Bundaberg Commercial, and I am a commercial realtor and business broker. So I spend all day helping people buy and sell commercial properties. And putting in an offer is something that's very unusual for most people. It's something that they've never done before. But you don't need to be bamboozled on how to do it. So the first thing you need to recognize is it doesn't really matter if it's a commercial offer or a residential offer. The process for buying a house and buying a commercial property is similar in this stage of when you put in an offer. So what I talk about today is just as applicable if you're going to go buy yourself another house or an investment property that's a residential place. Now, what you need to recognize is agents tend to use two different methodologies. Now, usually I say neither is better than the other, but my preference is that the way that I do it, which is written approvals and written offers to purchase, are better than the alternative, which are verbal ones. The reason I say that, particularly in the stage of commercial, there's a lot of intricacies in an offer. There's terms and conditions as well as pricing, GST ramifications, leases. Those sort of things get a little bit confusing for a verbal offer. Now, I have seen and I have actually taken clients who have given me verbal offers before, but they do get complicated. And my experience is verbal offers from a buyer tend to be the first ones to fall over quite quickly. A personality type sometimes really rears its face. You know the type, that the go-getters, oh, look, I've got cash, I'm going to do this is what we're going to do. And they're just as quick on the process as they are off. They get on that horse and ride it hard as they can, and then they hop off and walk away, and you don't know what's going on. So the failure rate for verbal offers, what I'm saying, tends to be dramatically higher than written offers. I think perhaps because I ask clients for a written offer, they do more thoughts, and because there's elements in there that may not have thought about. And when they do put in an offer that's in writing, it's sort of like more of a commitment. It's more skin in the game. It indicates that they're more serious than someone who just rings up and says, hey, I'll offer such and such for that particular property. Now, I use a template, and feel free to drop me a line or send me an email, and I'll send you that template without any concerns. It's fairly easy because, as you've worked out, I like to keep things nice and easy. It's a 2-page template, and the fun thing is I'll send that offer to purchase off to a lawyer, and they'll come back and give me a 20 or so page contract. So that's just the life, but keeping it simple. The main things that you'll have on the offer to purchase is the first section is essentially about the buyer. It says who they are, what legal name they use. Quite often that's something that people haven't actually thought about. Are you going to use a trust? Are you going to use a sole trader? Are you going to use a proprietary limited? Are you going to use a partnership? These are things that you miss out in a verbal offer. So the very first thing I ask in the offer to purchase in a written submission is what name do you want it in? And what address are they at? The contact details. The offer to purchase, you need to recognise, is not actually a contract, but I do get a lot of the information that I need for a draft contract from that offer to purchase. So that's why I have those questions. Then you have details on who's your solicitor and who's your accountant. Now, in instances where you buy a property, you may not need to put in who your accountant details are. But in instances when you're buying a business, you do need to have the accountant and the lawyer. Now, the lawyer, you may have had one that you've used for a long time. They may have done your family wills. They may have done a couple of estate plannings, some minor things, maybe even your residential property. That lawyer is not one that I would suggest you immediately go to. What you need is a commercial lawyer, and not all lawyers are commercial lawyers. I remember one of my country lawyers friends that I work quite well with, and she's a lot of fun. She did a contract for a commercial client, and when I came across that contract, I needed to go back. It was a lease, and I said, there's a few bits and pieces here missing. Like there was no annual increase. There was the name was wrong on the actual lease. A few seriously major pieces. And the interesting thing is, they said, we could have done this one better. And for me, that's about as much as an apology or an admission of a mistake from a lawyer that you're ever going to get. So yeah, they could have made that one better. That one turned out to be a happy ending because they did make a new lease and it worked out well. But that is why you have a look at a commercial lawyer, someone who's done commercial property and someone who's done businesses, depending on what it is that you're buying. Now, most firms that have more than one lawyer will usually have someone who works in the commercial space. So it's usually not a big issue. But introduce yourself, even give them a heads up saying, look, I'm going to go and buy a property or I'm going to buy a business. Are there any particular things you want me to consider or be aware of? And they may say, look, we need to get a legal name up, or, you're fine, just don't sign anything, put in an offer if you want to. Some lawyers are happy to look at the offer to purchase. I've had clients who've gone to do an offer of purchase and run it past their commercial lawyer at that stage. And it does make things longer. You can probably add another 2 weeks by the time it gets out. But, if that's what you're looking for, that's fine. Usually the offer purchase doesn't need to go to the lawyer because it's when we do the contract that goes to the lawyer. And trust me, I ain't doing nothing until it goes through both the lawyers for the buyer and the seller. It's all about taking one step at a time. So, make sure you've got yourself set up with a commercial lawyer. So we've gone through buyers' details, solicitors. Right. On the second page, it's essentially about the money and terms and conditions. It's, like I said, it's not difficult. I mean, it's very complicated. That's why I get paid so much money. But realistically, between you and me, it's not that difficult. But it does make sure that everyone is expecting the same thing. And that is the most critical thing in regards to making a purchase. You need the buyer, the lawyers, the accountants, and the sellers all to be looking at that purchase in the same way with the same conditions. And this is the way to do it. Everyone's got something in writing that's simple and easy to understand. So we'll talk about how much is a deposit. Now, deposits are interesting. Normally we have them at 10%. For bigger contracts, you may find that it's a smaller amount depending on what it is, but the seller probably just wants something that shows that you're serious. So if you got a 50 grand deposit or something, that tends to indicate to the seller that, hey, you are serious about it. Deposits, they can be applied one of two ways. Normally they are done at the signing of the contract. So we do the offer of purchase. That's agreed verbally by the buyers and sellers, goes to the lawyers write up the contract, and within 48 hours of signing the contract, you generally need to put in your deposit. Because there's an increasing number of contracts that collapse, you find two changes that are starting to appear in the area of deposits. More and more sellers are asking for non-refundable deposits, or if not a non-refundable deposit, at least they'll have a clause in there saying if the buyer pulls out, then they don't get all their deposit back. They get their deposit back minus the legal fees that the seller had to pay. This has happened because if you have 2 or 3 people, and I've had this happen unfortunately sometimes, if you've had 2 people go through due diligence and all the accountants and lawyers and solicitors, everything else that needs to go through, Building and Pest, the seller has had to outlay a fair bit of money, and then the buyer's changed their mind or for some reason decided not to go ahead, and the seller's just lumped with a whole heap of professional fees. The response to that now is that more and more people are asking for non-refundable deposits, or deposits where the buyer will pay the seller's fees if the contract collapses because of a reason of the buyer, and that it can include finance collapsing. The other thing with deposits, once again, because it takes a long time sometimes with contracts to get through, we're looking at getting deposits paid after the verbal acceptance of the offer to payment. Now, that's not scary by any means. It generally means that the deposit will go into a trust account, and a trust account is governed by law. In Queensland, it's covered by the Financial Management Agents Act. And for example, to give you some details, I get audited regularly on my trust account. Every dollar that goes in has to be accounted for while it's in there and accounted for when it's out. There are timeframes as to when I have to issue receipts. There are conditions. I can't actually release that deposit unless I get a letter from both the buyer and the seller's solicitors. There's a lot of protection around that money. So don't be too concerned if you need to pay a deposit at the stage where you put in the offer to purchase. So I will ask clients often for a deposit when I submit the offer to purchase to the solicitors. Why do we do that? Once again, it's to try and level the playing field and reduce the number of cancellations in contracts. If you put your deposit down at the start, you get a little bit more motivated. Actually, I'll probably clarify that a little bit. It doesn't actually help me with the cancellation rates, but what it does is it makes things go a little bit faster. Quite often, if you've got a client who hasn't, and I've got one I'm thinking of as an example, they were happy to sign the contract and put the deposit in. We put the details off to the solicitor. 2 months later, we're still waiting for them to get their act together, get a legal name from their accountant, get their due diligence done, everything along those lines. Whereas if we had been in a situation and we got a deposit 2 months ago, I can almost guarantee that the delays that are taking 2 weeks would probably take 1 week. I ring up and say, oh yeah, I need to make an appointment with my solicitor to talk to him. If they've got 50 grand in the bank and it's burning a hole in their pocket, they're ringing that solicitor and they're getting that appointment in a couple of days, not a couple of weeks. So that's the two trends that are coming in regards to the areas of deposits. So, but look, probably 90% of contracts have a deposit paid, and it's about 10%, and it's paid when it's signed by the two parties. If you are looking at finance, there'll be details on who the financier is. And if you're paying cash, that's cool. You just tick the box that says cash. Now, one of the things that, it's not a pet hate, but I just sit there and I just do not understand it. If you go to Woolworths, you'll get your shopping trolley and you'll go down the aisles, or Coles or Aldi, wherever it is you do your groceries. You put your groceries in, you walk to the cash register, you know how you're going to pay for that grocery. Why is it that 90% of people will go commercial property shopping and then they won't even talk to their financier until they've done their offer to purchase? And the first thing is, need finance, need to go talk to my bank. No. Do it like you're shopping at Woolworths. Make sure you've already spoken to your bank, you've got a budget or a pre-approval so that you know that you're likely to get that funding. Because it's tough to get finance. People, I think the reason is, for some purpose, they believe that it's easy to get finance. It's just a matter of making a phone call, bank will charge you interest, everyone gets their money, it's as easy as a credit card. In commercial finance, that is not the case. Earlier this year, there was a stage of about 2 months when the banks did not lend any money to a new business purchase. And it didn't matter how much cash you had, how much equity you had, how many other businesses and cash flow. They just were not doing it. They'd exceeded their quota or their budgets. The risk was high. They didn't know what was happening with interest rates. All sorts of reasons as to why. But it just demonstrated how hard it is to get finance. Now that moratorium has been removed now. Interestingly, I actually got my first email in 4 years from my bank saying, hey Peter, would you like some money? So that's like going from one extreme to the other extreme. I'm a small business, relatively new. We've just clocked over our 3rd year. But to actually get a request from the bank saying, hey, I got money to splurge is a huge change in 6 months. So yeah, maybe it is easy to get finance, but look, do yourself a favour. Don't get yourself in a position where you're embarrassed. Don't get yourself in a position where you're going to lose your deposit if you've got a non-refundable deposit. Make sure you've spoken to your bank, put in all the details. There's a lot of work you can do to get to the stage where the bank says, look, I'm 95% sure that you would get a loan for $500,000. Okay, then you know how much to go shopping with. I've got a client this morning. He hasn't gone and talked to the bank, but he's got plenty of equity. And he's looking at businesses ranging from $350,000 to $1.3 million. And I had to pull him up. I said, so how much is the bank going to lend you? Oh, I got plenty of property. So how much is the bank going to lend you? Oh, I don't know. Well, listen, before you start wasting everybody's time, go and make a phone call, talk to someone, see if you're going to get $350,000 or you're going to get $1.5 million. Because if you're not in that category, it's no use sending you information to digest and think about. This is not a romance novel. We're not into giving you details to do research. We're here doing business. We're here to help you fulfill your dreams, get that profit you're looking for, that lifestyle, that passive income. So do yourself a favour, treat the situation seriously. All right, so that would be the finance side. If it's a building, there'll be a box in there to tick whether you want to have building and pest. I recommend that every purchase you go and get building and pest, whether it's a new one or an old one, because just things like electrics and plumbing, you don't know. You may think a new tilt slab commercial complex is fine and dusted and no holes in the roof, but for the sake of $400, you get someone to crawl through all the crooks and crannies and where all the snakes go and the rats and rabbits and everything you don't want to know about, and they'll come back and they'll tell you if you've got problems or not. Yeah, the other thing too is it also can sometimes be a good bargaining chip if you've got something unexpected. Maybe there's a foundation issue that needs to be repaired. You've suddenly got some negotiation. You can either get them to fix it or you can fix it and take a little bit off the price. So building and pest is something that I really recommend, but it's an optional. If all else, check with your lawyer, ask them what they think. They're fairly conservative. I'd say they'd ask to have a building and pest inspection as well. Then we have what we call general terms and conditions. Now, things in that space, it could be like you want a new lease if you've got a tenant as opposed to assigning a lease. It could be you want to have a due diligence period in there, maybe 2 or 3 weeks to get your accountants and lawyers to be able to look through everything, the zonings, the financials of the business, any mapping, any changes of road structures, the likes of that. In Bundaberg, we've got a lot of activity with a new flood levy, so that will affect in various ways different properties in this area. So an area, one of the comments for 2 or 3 weeks due diligence is normal in terms and conditions, as is lease. Other things I've seen, you may have a non-disclosure clause if you're buying a business. The seller may have a restriction of 6 months. They can't open up another similar business within 20 kilometres or something in that bracket. That's an aspect. You could have a look at, increasingly, look, it used to be 50% of purchases over $500,000 would have a clause for vendor finance. That's probably creeping up to about 60-70% now. So if you've got vendor finance options, and that could be anything from we pay 70% at the change of contracts, and the remaining 30% is paid 6 months later. It can be as simple as that, or it can be a stock clause. The seller owns the stock until it's all sold. There's various patches in there. But if you were looking at vendor finance, that's what you would have in the terms and conditions. We would go on to including timeframes. Everybody has different timeframes. Right now, this video is being done in November. So November and December is crazy time for commercial real estate. Everyone wants to get their stuff done before Christmas. I've still got one who's looking at giving me the offer to purchase the next day and hoping to get it done by Christmas. Ain't going to happen, sunshine. Good luck if they do. So, you may have a clause in there, okay, we want it settled, mid-January. It may be you want it done because it's cash and you've done your due diligence. Perhaps you can do it in 2 weeks. So time frame is something to have a look for. And that time frame includes things like when will the building and pest inspection be done? It may be done within 10 days. When will the due diligence be done? That's generally done within 3 weeks. That sort of time frame is what we have a look at. And the final part, and of course the best part, is the price. Now, why do I put the price at the bottom of the template? It's quite simple. You go up to a seller, and if the first thing you tell them is a price, they will not hear anything else about the due diligence, about the vendor finance, about the clauses, about the risks, about the pluses, about the minuses, about the exclusion clauses. They'll just be focused on the price. So whilst price is the most important, it needs to be balanced with the terms and conditions. As I keep saying in my videos, and you've probably heard me say several times before, with reward comes risk. So if you've got a high price on your property, you've probably got risks, and that'll be outlined in the offer to purchase. And those risks could be anything, like I said, vendor finance. It could be a long lead time, exclusion clauses, those sort of aspects. So the last thing I have is the actual price. Probably the only thing with the price is, look, there's probably 2 points I could share with you. One is make sure you understand about GST. This is when you talk with your accountant, because every situation, every contract is different. Generally, for both a business and a commercial property, GST will not be applicable if it's what's called a going concern. If you buy your asset on Monday and you can run it easily, just like it was run on Friday, then it's generally considered a going concern. So if it's a commercial property and there's a tenant in there on Friday and that same tenant is there on Monday, even with a new lease, that's fine. That's a going concern. You don't pay GST. If it's a business and you've got everything you need to do to open the doors on Monday and run the business just like it was on Friday, so you've got stock, you've got staff, you've got accounts, you've got customers, well then odds are it'll be a class as a going concern and there's no GST applicable. If you're looking at $1 million purchase and it's an empty commercial property and you may want to do some renovations or something, or you haven't got a tenant moving in there for a couple of months, odds are you're going to pay GST on that. And that's $100,000 on a $1 million property. So that's something that you need to be considered and be aware of. So there's a section down there in the pricing to ascertain whether it's going to be GST or not. And I say go see your accountant because not all organisations are applicable. If it's a not-for-profit like an NDIS provider, you may not be paying GST. There's non-government organisations, even government purchases, they may not be paying GST. So it's something that you do need to check, both as a buyer and a seller. Because trust me, if you get at the contract stage and they're sitting there scratching their heads and, I thought GST was included, and the other person says, I don't think GST was included, it tends to be a little bit of a Barney. Which is, again, the final reason why I make sure everything's in writing. Put it in writing and I'll go and talk to the seller and we'll negotiate, and then we chuff it off to the lawyers and they create the contracts from there. All right, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop a comment. Send me an email to bundabergcommercial@gmail.com if you want to get a copy of the offer to template. Look, it's nothing secret. I'm quite happy for you to use it. If it means that we increase the quality of commercial real estate in Australia, then hey, I'm happy with that. Or around the world, you'd need to modify it slightly for United States and Europe, but the general concepts are the same. It's about making sure everyone looks at things the same way. Okay, hope you've enjoyed that. Take care, God bless, and catch you next week.